Welcome to One Bad Podcast. Here's your hosts, KD and Shaner.
So, KD, we ended on a cliffhanger the last episode, which was the reason you mentioned in the last podcast that it was such a big deal, not only to work with Danny, not only to really find our sound, really, get our first big studio experience, but the reason all that was going on is that 604 Records in Vancouver, which is Chad Kroger of Nickelback, I think he might still be part owner, but it was a big deal for us. We had a record deal, I don't want to say looming, but it was like I put last time, it was kind of like the carrot being dangled in front of us. And if it was kind of like, you get these 3 songs, if they're good, if you can get some radio traction, we were getting a lot of that. If this happens, if that happens, maybe something, right? You're a little band from Saskatoon. We don't know, but there was a record deal on the horizon, possibly.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. And yeah, I mean, we'd started to get some attention, a little bit because we could, we had a good live show and we had some radio, but I think people saw the potential, like Simpkins saw the potential, the owner of 604. But yeah, so we cut those 3 songs, and yeah, I remember at the time thinking thinking we'd cut these 3 songs, get a massive record deal, and be as big as Nickelback in no time, kind of thing.
And then what did we release first? Was it Retribution Blues? Because what was on the EP? Retribution Blues,
Rust Bucket, and Works and Days.
Yes. Oh man, that song that's the only, it's only on that EP, isn't it?
Actually listened to it the other day.
Completely forgot.
Yeah, it still stands up. It's got some vibes. But I think, but we didn't release Blues. No, I think we just released, or did we release Blues?
Yeah, because remember there was, we'll probably get to this in a bit. There was weirdness because, actually we did, because
we couldn't.
Spoiler alert, we released Rust Bucket as our first single off the Red album. And right. There's a whole story about that and what happened and what almost happened. But we were going to do Blues, but they were like, you've already done it. So you got to, but yeah, because we got a little bit of traction with radio, but it was independent. It wasn't through a label or anything. So
yeah.
But this leads to this, this era when you actually look back on it, you're like, when you're living through everything, when you're living through something, everything seems to take forever. You're like, holy shit, is anything ever going to happen? But now you look back and you're like, wow, we did Orange City. We toured our asses off. We moved out of that house. We met Danny. We're out there recording. The record deals, you're like, holy shit, a lot happened in a short period of time. But we had a huge decision to make, which was Blues was out, doing okay. And they were asking for stuff. We were kind of like, well, if you get a song on the radio, if this, if that. And we were showing them that we can do this stuff, but they were still they weren't exactly biting. So the next deal was well, do we move to Vancouver? Do we show? And I remember being it was we've had a few of these moments in our career where it's how seriously do you actually take this? Will you uproot your life for your dream? And it was tough. It was a tough decision. I mean, still none of us had a ton of cash. You don't just move to Vancouver even in that era and think it should be no problem, right?
Well, that's it. I mean, yeah, that was a big decision. And I think I do say this often to bands these days is are you prepared to move to Toronto or Vancouver, right? Because that, you can make it by not being in those big cities, but it's a lot tougher. You're going to be seen more, and you'll be seen as more professional too if you're in those 2 big cities, right? And Toronto probably better than Van, but we chose Van because that's where the label was, and it was a closer drive from Saskatoon. But yeah, it was a big decision. And I think it just showed how committed we all were. We all wanted to become the biggest band in the country or the world. And then we got out there, and that was kind of the crazy thing is, well, we eventually, I mean, I don't know how far we want to jump ahead, but we got the deal eventually, which is great.
Yeah.
But then we entered this, speaking of that waiting period, I mean, I feel like the hardest time was the time from when we signed the deal to when we finally released Scarecrows and actually had a hit, and or even the whole record, I think, because, and the crazy thing was, just shows how there's most things in the music biz are so out of your control as an artist. But for us, it was the fact that Carly Rae Jepsen blew up and was on our label. And so it was sort of all hands on deck at 604 Records on Carly Rae. And basically Simkin's like, I'm not releasing your record and I'm too busy. So we just sat around Vancouver in the fucking rain, you know, and the gloomy Vancouver, you know, I just picture walking downtown to Vancouver and you're surrounded by, you know, all the sad, you know, drug addicts and homeless people and like the rain. And I was just like, holy shit, this is why did we come out here? But it was because it was I think it was what, 2 years of sitting around waiting, right?
It was, yeah, 2 years.
Right? Like 2 years, like about 2 years of your life. We thought, and around that time too, like I remember, like, you know, our buddies, the Sheepdogs, blew up with the whole Rolling Stone thing, and everyone's like, Saskatoon's band, the Sheepdogs, and you know, we all thought that we'd become the Saskatoon band that broke through, right? And we're sitting around, what are you guys up to? Like, well, we're just sitting around being depressed in the Vancouver rain, you know, waiting on our fucking label to release the record. But to me, that was like probably the hardest time of our career for me was those 2 years. But how about you?
It wasn't hard for me because I think I blocked it all out. Where I'm like, that never happened. We're out there, and then we went on tour, and it was great.
That's when he started getting into heavy IPA drinking. So we were drinking the 8% IPAs. So maybe most of it is a fog.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and one of the Amnesiac from Phillips that really did a number on me. But no, you know, man, that it was so difficult. You're right, because like, you know, we went out there with this momentum. And you go, you know, and it was like, holy shit, we're moving out again, the same way we moved into the band house in Saskatoon, where like the band is going out to Vancouver. All four of us went out. Granny was in the band at the time. And just, we went out there and had all this momentum, felt great. I think because then we finished the record, obviously, and had these songs that we thought like, holy shit, like we have written the best songs of our career. That much we knew. Yeah. We had a feeling about some of them being like, some of these like might have some actual potential for radio, and like not in that delusional way we were doing it in 2005, where it's like, fuck it, we're going to take over the world. Here's Alive in Texas. Like, it's going to do it. But this time we were like, there's real momentum. And then you're right. You said it perfectly. Like, all these things you cannot imagine might happen, could happen, where Carly Rae blew up with that song, and just they shelved everybody. It wasn't just us, so everyone's just sitting around like the label wouldn't even meet with us for 2 years. It was like we heard nothing for months.
And that was, I mean, obviously they could have handled that way fucking better. Like we sat, like they wouldn't return emails and stuff, and it's like, this is our lives. We're sitting there, and we're also, like you said earlier, we're broke. We're working our asses off trying to just pay the bills, and our dreams, like you said, we think we're ready to do it. And I remember I was pretty bummed out. I mean, just sitting around.
It was tough, man.
And looking back now, I would have just walked into his office and like gave it to him. But we didn't want to. We weren't who we are now, and we didn't also want to get dropped from the label or something. You know, they could have said, we're not releasing the record. Go to hell, and we couldn't have done anything, right?
Yeah. And honestly, like, obviously, you know, probably more than anybody else in my life, how many bands, like, all through history that have had that happen, like, record a record, the label's like, nah, forget it. You know, we're not feeling it, or we don't think it's viable, and they can just kill it. And we were worried about that, because it's like, holy shit, even at that point, we're already, you know, that's 5-6 years into our career and all of that touring. And this is another thing that I think people don't get about being an artist, where you're like, it is really difficult to keep your shit together when you've worked this hard, you put all this time in. We were like, you know, I won't even say the amount of money in debt we were just to get that record made, but now we can't tour. So not only is it like, oh shit, like you might not get on the radio and your dreams might not come true. It's also like, literally, I got the bank calling me saying like, you've got to make payments on this card. Like but we're like, we can't tour if we don't have new music. Cause already in that era, even though the other records didn't do much on radio, it was still like, we're building a fan base. So if you have new songs out, well, you can go tour. So I remember we would jam like we always did and try to figure out, what do we do? Like, we couldn't get gigs because the places we were playing were like, we want new music. Like, you can't come back with just the same show that you did last year. Yeah. So it's just like, this was like rock and roll purgatory for us. Like, you're right.
I was going to say purgatory. And at least if you because the middle world is crap. Like, if you're not succeeding or you're succeeding, that's easy. But in the middle, it's like you feel stuck. And I remember just feeling a lot of anxiety around that time, and also I was resentment towards our label, but you couldn't do much about it. And it was just like, we could have easily, I'm sure any of us could have given up, right? Like, and said, I'm going back to Saskatoon. I'm giving up, But
yeah, and that's a good point too. And honestly, man, like, I'm proud of everybody in this band. Like, us, our new members, former members, like, we put up with a lot of shit. And you're right, like, could have thrown the towel in and been like, well, forget it. Like, but for 2 years, like, and that's no joke, 2 solid years. Like, there was very few shows, couldn't hear back from the label, and we were just sitting there just wondering, like, what do you do? Because it was like every step in our career was like, it can't get harder than this. It can't be, driving out to like Grand Prairie with no gas in the tank in like 2006. You're thinking, it can't get worse than like these gigs we're playing. And, but of course it can. You're like, don't ever say that. Like, just, but it was a point too. And it's good to spend some time on this, because again, we talked about this in like early episodes, how these are moments bands typically gloss over, right? Because if you look at our career, it's like, start out in Saskatoon, we did well there. We're like a pretty big Saskatoon band. Scarecrows comes out, it's a hit. We're on the road. We're opening for Judas Priest. Like, that's how like a bio goes, where you're like, of course you're not going to sit there for 15 minutes and talk about how miserable you were walking around Vancouver, thinking like, and I remember like we weren't, it wasn't one of these things where we were sitting around thinking like, well, somebody's got to, they've got to help us out. Like, we were stuck. Like, there wasn't anything for us to do. And we'd never been in a position where it was like, you can't do anything. Like, you have this label, that's great, but you're stuck. But I'm proud of everybody for pushing through. And we did, probably a little too much drinking in that era, like, for real. Just, we jammed, but I remember spending, half the jam just talking and being like, what can we do? What should we do? How do we, and then, we're coming up on time here pretty quick, but it's a huge moment for us because we pushed through it, and, we did whatever gigs we could get. And finally the label starts picking up the phone, and, now it's like, okay, well, you've got this record, and it's time to get out and figure out what song is going to go on the radio. And then we release our massive hit, Rust Bucket.
We'll get that. Okay, and I want to say 2 things before this episode ends. Because first and foremost, in those 2 years, you're right. That was one of those times in our lives and our career, and that everyone has it in their life at some point where, because everyone kept asking, remember, what are you guys up to? You moved to Vancouver, like, what's next? And we kept saying, we got this thing, it's going to happen, and we believed in the songs, but we all believed in ourselves, right? And no one else did. No one else no radio people, aside from Gary, knew what was going to come next. Like, no one, like, sometimes the only people you have supporting you is you, right? Like, we knew. And people were like, sure, you're going to make it. 2 years sitting around in Vancouver waiting, but we knew. The second thing I want to end on this is, I remember, because we'd sit around and talk. You say we just sit around and talk and drink. I remember I came up with this crackpot idea that, like, because radio wouldn't play our songs. Remember my anti-radio release strategy, which was, we're going to release a song.
Oh, yeah.
And radio wasn't allowed to play it. If any radio stations play it, we would sue them or something. Remember? It's like this. Like, it was like, what a dumbass idea. But like, I thought, radio, this is a song not for radio. Because remember, radio was playing all the crappy stuff, the Nickelback and stuff that I'm not a fan of. But we're like, we're going to release a song. It's only for the fans. Stations can't play it. It's like this anti-radio manifesto. And I think you maybe said, good idea. And then the next day you're like, that's actually a shitty idea. But it was this anti-radio release.
Oh,
plan.
Dude, I bet I was on board, because I think, like, when you're making decisions based on alcohol and rage-fueled rants, you're like, yeah, fuck those guys. Like, they don't get our songs. Like, but also I think deep down we're like, that might work. What happens?
Sue them. And I was going to draft a letter of like suing. Anyways, okay, we'll leave it on that. I think that's a great way to end it. But
Dude, that is the anti-radio manifesto, and I mean, we'll see. Like, there's we have new music in the it's sitting in the bin right now. So you never know. Maybe we take the anti-radio manifesto to 2024, right?
well, at least we have Spotify now. That we didn't have Spotify back then, so the idea was crap. There's no way to get it out there. But anyways,
Or were you just ahead of your time, buddy, as you often are?
love it. Okay.
It's a great place to end, dude. And getting into coming up is watershed moment. We're going to get into scarecrows and all that. I still didn't touch on the TVs, I realized, so we'll bring that up next time too. We'll talk to you soon, buddy.
Okay, peace, buddy.
Thanks for listening to One Bad Podcast.